This is part 2 of chapter 21 on extinction.
Now we're going to talk about resistance to extinction and the variables that affect resistance to extinction. Resistance to extinction is continued responding during the extinction process. So we continue to see the behavior occur. And behavior that continues to occur during extinction is said to have better resistance to extinction than behavior that diminishes more quickly. There are 3 tentative statements describing resistance to extinction as it relates to continuous and intermittent reinforcement. The first statement is that intermittent reinforcement may produce behavior with greater resistance to extinction than the resistance produced by continuous reinforcement, or CRS. And this is because the learner will never know when they'll get reinforced or not, so they'll maintain that behavior. So as intermittent reinforcement is effective when we're teaching replacement behaviors, it can also work against us when we aren't consistent with the extinction. Whereas continuous reinforcement, the learner knows that after every response, they will get reinforcement. And when that reinforcement stops, you'll see less resistance to extinction. Or in intermittent reinforcement, they're not sure, so they'll continue to respond, trying to take their chances to see if they'll make contact with that reinforcement. The second statement is that some intermittent schedules may produce more resistance to extinction than others, right? So more predictable schedules are more quote unquote extinguishable than less predictable schedules. So a more predictable schedule would be a fixed ratio, a fixed interval. So knowing after a certain amount of responses, after a certain amount of time, one will get reinforced, where a variable interval or a variable ratio is less predictable. So again, they'll never know when they're going to get reinforced, so they're going to maintain that behavior.
And the third statement is that the thinner the intermittent schedule of reinforcement is, the greater the resistance to extinction will be. Another variable that affects resistance to extinction is establishing operations. So this is saying that all stimuli that function as reinforcers require a minimum level of an establishing operation, meaning that there has to be some type of motivation present. So resistance to extinction is greater when extinction is carried out under high motivation than under low. So depending on how motivated they are by that reinforcer will determine the resistance to extinction, right? So if somebody's hungry and they really want that edible or that snack, we're going to see high resistance to extinction. Other variables that affect resistance to extinction is the number, magnitude, and quality of reinforcement. So the number of times a behavior produces reinforcement may influence the resistance to extinction. And a behavior with a long history of reinforcement may have more resistance to extinction than a behavior with a shorter history of reinforcement. Another variable affecting resistance to extinction is the number of previous extinction trials. So, successive applications of conditioning and extinction may influence the resistance to extinction. So, again, we're looking at practice makes perfect, right? So, the more that they're kind of exposed to exhibiting the behavior and then that behavior not being reinforced, we'll probably see less resistance to extinction. Response effort is another variable. So this is the effort required for a response or behavior, and this influences its resistance to extinction. So a response requiring great effort diminishes more quickly during extinction than a response requiring less effort. So there are 10 guidelines for application of extinction. The first step in using extinction effectively is to identify and withhold all possible sources of reinforcement that maintain that problem behavior. The second is withholding reinforcement consistently. So, all behavior change procedures require consistent application, but consistency is essential and important for extinction. Consistency is the single most difficult aspect in using extinction, right? If one person is reinforcing the behavior and another person is not, right, we're going to maintain that problem behavior, and that's intermittent reinforcement. The next is combining extinction with other procedures. So we would never use extinction alone, right? It's part of a treatment package. The effectiveness increases when it's combined with other procedures such as differential reinforcement, antecedent procedures, anything that can reduce the extinction effects like the extinction burst, especially when we're dealing with aggression. Another way to effectively use extinction could be using instructions. So, behaviors sometimes diminish more quickly during extinction when the teachers describe the extinction procedure to the student. So, if you have a student that is blurting out, you can say, I'm going to ignore you until you raise your hand and wait for me to call on you, right? So we're providing that instruction and letting them know what this procedure will look like. We also want to plan for extinction produced aggression, right? So behaviors that occurred infrequently in the past will sometimes become prominent during extinction by replacing the problem behaviors. And frequently, these side effects could cause aggression, right? And that's part of that extinction burst. We also want to increase the number of extinction trials. An extinction trial occurs each time the behavior does not get reinforced. So, whenever possible, we want to increase the number of extinction trials. So, again, this is the whole practice makes perfect, right? If we know that something or denial to access of something kind of creates these opportunities, we don't want to avoid them. So, for example, teachers will tell me that, well, anytime he gets the iPad, he has a hard time transitioning away from it. And so then they just don't offer the iPad as a reinforcer. Well, then we're not teaching them anything. We're not teaching them how to successfully cope and transition away from the iPad and understanding that they can earn it again. Including significant others in the extinction process. So it's important that everyone in the environment does not reinforce the target behaviors. All individuals that come in contact with the learner have to apply the same extinction procedure for it to be effective. We also want to guard against unintentional extinction. So this means those desirable behaviors. Sometimes we place those on extinction unintentionally, right? So the student that raises their hand appropriately and calmly, we can inadvertently place that on extinction because we are then paying attention to the student that's blurting out. So it's common to give the most attention to problems um, that kind of, or problem behaviors versus paying more attention to those replacement behaviors that we want. We also want to maintain extinction decreased behavior. So that means that we want to leave this procedure in effect permanently to maintain, um, the low levels or the decreased behavior. And we want to increase the replacement behaviors. And lastly, we want to know when not to use extinction or when it's not appropriate to implement extinction. So, extinction can be inappropriate if the behavior placed on extinction is likely to be imitated by others. And then when we're looking at extreme behaviors, so some behaviors are so harmful to themselves or to others, or so destructive that they must be controlled with more humane procedures available. So, again, we probably wouldn't just ignore a behavior if the function was for attention, right? So, again, seeing extinction as a singular intervention is not recommended. And as we mentioned before, it's always part of a treatment package, right? It's what we're doing to the maladaptive behavior, but then we're also using differential reinforcement and other antecedent procedures.